happy with,
Sorry, I wanted to hit record for you. You're
yeah,
really happy with
with what I've been doing. And
good.
I literally have been, I mean, I do a little bit of revision as I go along, and I do go back if I feel like it's really not on track, because I don't want to have the story going in the wrong place, or the characters not meshing with what they've said,
Hmm.
or because I have limited amount of time, so I sometimes don't get a whole lot written depending on the day. So I go back and I reread. I do a tiny little bit, and then I moved on. But I mean, seriously, a lot more written than I have in a very long time, which I was just thrilled about. And the what came along with that, I think, and I don't know, was that that when I started rereading what I was writing, it felt better to reread it, and it didn't feel like, maybe because my mindset was I don't need to go back and revise this, but it felt like the scenes I was writing were were I was able to like say, okay, I'm okay with that scene for right now,
That's
and I
great.
can move on. Whereas before I was like being so ultra picky about it, and
Yeah,
it had
you
to
do
be
the same
perfect.
scene over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now I feel like I went, like, I was thinking about what I should send to you because I had a whole bunch of new stuff since the
Yeah.
last time. And I was like, should I send something that I'm like, okay, that actually I sort of like that. It's not going to be perfect, and I might go back and change it, and I might whatever. But that it was not something I was really struggling with, and that's why I sent you what I did, which is the newest two scenes, which are really raw. I didn't go
Mm.
back and do anything because um, I have been I've been doing a lot of reading of authors who I'm just or being cognizant of how they're using movement and sort of body movement
Yeah.
to show emotion, and how they're putting it and where they're putting it. Because I think that's what's in my mind right now, that the skill that I'm feeling I'm lacking,
Mm.
and I'm struggling to do it in my own work,
Mm.
and like to recognize, not necessarily to recognize where to put it, but I'm putting it in places I don't think is correct, like in the middle of inner thought, or in the middle of a dialogue instead of leaving it till the end. And it's also some of the inner thought too, like putting a little piece of inner thought in, and it breaks up the dialogue, but not sure whether that's the right thing to, like, it feels right to me, but that's not always the
Yeah.
correct way, in air quotes. Um, so I've been thinking a lot about, like, I read Tana French, and she's very good at this. I've been reading her books, and then I've been reading VC Schwab, and
Yeah.
she's also very good at this. And partly, I'm mostly Tana French. I've been noticing it on. It's like it's the movement of the whole body. It could be feet. It could be how someone's leaning against a chair. It could be, but it's not just like the typical. Because I keep using, like, she smiled, and she raised her eyebrows, and I just keep thinking it's just so. I mean, I know it's used, and I can see it being used, but but that's it's too much when that's all I'm using, and I don't have any repertoire outside the sort of standard. She sat forward on her elbows on the, to get closer to me, or she looked me in the eye, or didn't look me in the eye, or she turned away, or she got up and walked to the. I mean, all of that is okay, but when it's all I have, um, I feel like I'm not, and I don't know whether you can help me with that. Maybe that just needs to be me, like, thinking through how do I visual, because I sit and visualize the scene in my head, and I think what kind of body movements would go along with that. And I'm just not coming up with
What are you trying to get from these body movements?
um
Why are you focusing in on body movements?
because when I notice, for example, the one of the books I was reading that caught my eye, or that caught my intention, was like the movement, the color, in this case, the color of the eye changed. So it was not just and it was the emotion that was being described um was preliminarily seen through this body motion. And so, like the tapping of the feet when someone's nervous, instead of like their eyes being nervous, or just saying they were nervous. And so tend to say things like that. They talked nervously, but what does that look like, and what does that mean? And my question to you is also, do I need to worry about that? Because maybe I don't. Maybe saying, just telling the reader that the person was nervous is enough without showing it somehow. That is a
It
question.
it depends on, so you've got kind of three questions hovering around. One is, how do I write more artistic body language?
Yeah.
Um, that's a question we can talk about. More artistic body language does not necessarily equal clearer emotions. It just equals more artistic body language.
Okay.
The second question you have is, how do I clarify emotions? And like, how do I make sure the reader is feeling what I want them to feel?
Yes.
That's a different question than how do I write more artistic body language?
Right.
And then the third question I hear you kind of like hunting around for is like, where do I put in body language and inner thoughts? Which is different than how do I write more artistic body language and how do I. So before I start answering all three of those questions, which of those three is most important to you? Because we'll start
Um,
there.
the first one is, for example, in these two scenes I sent you, um, very important that the emotion is there. That in the first scene with Victoria and
Oh,
Michael, that her angst of one leaving him, and that already got taken care of a little bit earlier on in a scene where she's going through the house and
yeah,
finding the note, and then and now it's the beginning of the realization that she needs to move beyond using him
yeah,
as her support, and that's between he and she, right? And she's like got him in her head. And then the second scene is the scene right before, where Tiffany comes and she's had this absolute breakdown with her husband. I mean, he's told her, I'm seeing another woman. I
yeah,
want a divorce in like next week, and I want her emotion to come through because it's her emotion that is the catalyst in the end. Her emotion plus her convincing Victoria that Victoria needs someone alive with her in Costa Rica as she goes through this 2 week vacation,
okay,
reliving the honeymoon. And
yeah,
so I need that emotion. I need Victoria to connect with the emotion of Tiffany's emotions. So I need those emotions to be clear, and that they're clear that their relationship is changing, um, and it's moving towards a place, and will end up in a place where where that moment is the catalyst for, and the subsequent conversation in the last chapter, which I'm in the middle of finishing up right now, where Victoria finally says, because I've been really struggling, like, why would Victoria finally say you can come with me on this vacation? It's been a real,
okay,
like, I've been trying to figure that out. So that's where all of that came from, like her realizing that she can't, the beginning of that realization, because she'll realize it and finally know that she needs somebody else and
yeah,
Michael, but also somebody else. So though that's why those two scenes are so important emotionally. And so I wrote the text, the dialogue, and then
hmm
I started putting in where I found it came naturally. I started putting in some of the inner thought and some of the physicality of it.
okay,
And then I was realizing that it just was feeling like I wasn't getting the depth that I wanted. I can put in the physicality, and I have it. If I go back, I'll probably see that I've been writing it all along in a way that doesn't feel like there's enough depth to it. And maybe I don't need that. Maybe that is not what I need. Maybe it's enough to use the dialogue. So that's why I brought these to you to see.
yeah. So, that was really helpful. So let's start big theory, and then I'm going to show you in your piece because I left notes on this in your piece. So
Okay.
let's start big theory, and then we'll go into, then I'll show you how it's working in your piece.
Okay.
So we have, when we're talking about what we're writing, um, we have our perspective, and you're writing third person or first person. You're writing first person.
Yeah.
So first person POV. the narrator and the vehicle character together, right? So I'm starting a perspective because the emotions of the reader, the reader's emotional journey, EJ equals the vehicle's emotional journey. So we start here because if your if your vehicle doesn't feel it, your reader doesn't feel it.
Right.
Flat out.
Right.
I want you to remember that because when we get to your second scene, that's important.
Okay.
So to convey what the vehicle's experienced, you have two types of tools. You have exposition, which are paragraphs of description, and you have dialogue, which are exchanges between characters. Exposition doesn't create emotion. It reflects on existing emotion and rides the wave of emotion that's already been created.
Does it also explain? Can it explain?
hmm That's part of riding the wave, though. It doesn't make the reader feel something. It extends the feeling the reader already has.
Okay.
Um, the only caveat to this is when you're starting a scene.
Right.
Now, you can't do this because you're writing in first person POV, but if you're in a um omniscient, which I call a third party narrator, but when you're an omniscient narrator or a third person close, you can use some exposition before a scene to set a tone. Um, you can't do it in first person because every moment is a scene because you are in the vehicle's head all the time.
But doesn't like, for example, the scene I have before this where Victoria finds she's in the kitchen, she's in the house, she's in the kitchen, she's saying goodbye because she knows she needs to get away. She doesn't know about Costa Rica yet, but she knows she needs to like leave town after she's quit. Um, she is setting the scene by describing what's going on around her, where she is, what she remembers. Is that not me setting her doing
It's
that?
not what I'm talking about where you can use exposition to set a
Oh, okay.
scene.
Okay.
You're just using exposition as description
Okay.
because you're in her POV. So in first person POV, this tool of exposition to set an emotional tone is far less effective in first person POV
Okay.
because what this tone setting makes effective, the way this tone setting is effective, and this doesn't necessarily apply to you directly, but let's just look at an example to kind of fill in the gaps for you.
Yeah, because I'm not quite sure what that would sound like.
Yeah. Um so this is the opening of Beloved by Toni Morrison. Oh no, that's the wrong. That's Blue Eyed Cat. I don't want that. I want Beloved. Sorry, that's a box set. Um, Beloved. There we go. So, opening of Beloved by Toni Morrison. You can see this web page, right? No, I haven't shared my screen with you. Hold on. Um, uh, so here's the opening of Beloved by Toni Morrison. Um, that's the forward. Okay, I don't want the forward. There we go. 124 was spiteful, full of baby's venom. The woman in the house knew it, and so did the children, for each of them put up with the spite in his own way. But in 1873, Sethi and her daughter Denver were its only victims. the separation, Sethi is going to, this is a third person close novel. Sethi and Denver are both going to be vehicles in the novel. The separation from them allows the narrator to comment on what's happening.
Okay.
That sets an emotional tone that, where did my things go? That sets an emotional tone, um,
That I can't do because I'm doing
that you
first.
can't do because you're in first person.
Gotcha.
So
That makes sense.
I tell you that to tell you, don't don't try to set emotional tones with big paragraphs of exposition, with big descriptions. All
Okay.
you can do is ride the wave of existing emotion. So when you have this scene of her like looking at things in the house ready to go, the reader is living in the last emotion she had.
Okay.
Whatever that emotion is, that's where the reader's living. So it, you're not setting a new emotional tone. You are just riding the wave of an existing emotional tone. Where
Gotcha.
this gets really bad is if, because a lot of times what writers will try to do is they'll have like an excited and happy conversation with somebody, and then they'll move to a scene where their vehicle's alone, and now their vehicle's going to get sad, and their vehicle tries to get sad alone, and the sadness never resonates. And it's like, why isn't the sadness resonating? Well, the sadness isn't resonating because you're still riding the wave of happy. You
Right.
can tell your reader, my character is now sad. Your reader will logically understand the character is now sad. The reader won't feel the sadness.
Okay. So there's still, even though you might put it on the page, you might, you might have them talking to themselves, but they're still not until
Yeah.
so, okay. All right. That makes
So, yeah. So when we're riding the wave, there's a couple things we need to remember. The first thing we need to remember is waves run out, which means the bigger the emotion you set, um, with the dialogue, the more wave you have to ride.
okay.
So you you have to be careful. Sometimes people um will set a tone, like we'll use dialogue to set a tone, and then have like, and it's just a small tone that they've set. That's so weird. It's just a small tone that they've set, and then they wonder why their paragraphs, their 10 paragraphs after they've set a small tone, aren't giving them greater emotional resonance, right? Because they have a quick conversation and then they try to describe they try to describe how the reader's feeling with piles of body language and the reader wandering around by themselves, and they're like, this isn't working, but I have all these words talking about the emotion, but the emotion isn't feeling any bigger. That's because the wave ran out. They didn't set a big enough emotional tone with their dialogue, and so they only had a small wave to ride. The
Right.
wave
Okay.
ran out, and now there's nothing to ride. So
Right.
they're like, oh, I just have words on the page, and I
Right.
feel like I'm describing, but I'm not feeling, right? So, and that's the difference we're talking about, is describing an emotion versus having the reader feel an emotion. Those are
Right.
two different things. So to get the reader to feel an emotion, you want to think about screen time in the reader's imagination. So if you think of the reader's imagination as, or if you think of the reader um, as watching your book as a movie.
I do that in my head. Like
Yeah,
I
we
do.
all do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like I'm trying to do that. Like,
Hmm.
does does this, because I'm obviously I put some description in there, but I'm doing a lot more of like, where are they? What are they saying? How is that reaction going on? What are they looking like? Like, what is that visual? What are the visuals that I have in my head? So I do a lot of that.
Yeah.
That I'm good at. The visualization I'm good at.
Yeah, and I think because we live in the golden age of television and
Yeah.
visual media, this is, and we have for the last like 30 years, this is this is how we all perceive books now. We all see them as movies in our head. The
Yeah,
longer, in fact, I'm reading a book right now that was written before kind of television and media popped out, and it's shocking how different the writing is.
yeah.
Um, so this screen time of the imagination, like when you're, it's not more words equals more time.
Okay.
Does not. And that's another mistake we make. Um, we think like, oh, so I just need to have like a whole ton of body language here. That's why I ask you that first question.
Yeah.
More words does not equal more time. Um, more exchanges equals more time.
So it's interesting when I wrote the first scene with Michael and Victoria, I didn't want body language in there. I
Yeah.
didn't put it in because for me it was the words and it was almost the shortness of some of the phrases. Like
Hmm.
that to me, and I read it out loud. My mom is a member of a writers group, and so I took that particular scene to the writers group, and I just wanted to hear it read out loud in front of a group, and I read it to them, and they had an emotional reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I saw a few places where it didn't work, where I was sort of twisting over my tongue, but for the most part it is what I wanted for that scene. And
Yeah.
then afterwards I thought, oh no, there's not enough of something else. It's only the text. There's not almost nothing else. And that's when I was like, what can I add in? And I didn't add it in because I was writing the next scene I had written on, and I wasn't, I had just pulled that. I was already writing the next scene with finishing it up. And so I didn't go back and do something. And so, but my first gut was that that scene is what I wanted it to be. But then I was started feeling like there wasn't enough there. And the
Yeah.
next one, I felt like I didn't have enough, but it was just my gut feeling about it. Like, and maybe I don't know. I'm not sure what it was that made me decide one or the other. But I don't know if if I'm right about that or there's no right or wrong. I know, but in this case, I'm.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, we'll look at that scene in a second.
Mhm.
Because I definitely see what you're saying. Um, so And you're right. It is your most emotional scene. It works. It's doing what you want it to do because you're doing this. More exchanges equals more screen time.
Mhm.
So, like, just to finish the math problem, more exchanges equals deeper emotion. So, if you want deeper emotion, the answer isn't describe it more,
Okay.
which is where we naturally go as writers. We're naturally like, okay, I want deeper emotion. I need more paragraphs describing it. If
Right.
you want deeper emotion, you need more exchanges between the characters.
Okay.
Now, exchanges are broken up into utterances. Each character has a like utterance. Those utterances have you have four tools that create an utterance, and this is kind of how they rank. Um uh so you have the four tools. The first and most powerful conveyor of emotion is vocalization.
Right.
What the words that come out of their mouth are the is the most powerful carrier. The next one is external body language. That's the stuff you're talking about. He smiled, he winked, he moved his arm left and right. He,
Yeah.
did these things. He walked across the room, picked up a knife, and stabbed the table with it. That's all external body language. Internal feelings are her gut wrenched, her throat tightened, her head hurt, her feet felt the need to run, right? Like, and this is where we'll talk about the different types of body language in a minute, but because that's your first question of like how do I write different types of body language? These two, the senses external action, internal senses are your second biggest conveyor of emotion. In first person POV, they become almost as powerful as vocalizations
Right.
because we're in the narrator's head. Your third is reflective inner thoughts. So reflective inner thoughts are the third most powerful conveyor of emotions. Vocalizations first, external body language second, or internal feelings, kind of a close tie. And then reflective inner thoughts are third.
Okay.
So
Got
again, the mistake we often make as authors is we're like, okay, I want a deeper emotion. So we have one exchange and then we go straight to our tools. And we add external body language and we add internal body language, we add reflective thought. And then we're like, okay, I have deepened the emotion. You know, Michael said something, Vicky said something, and but when Vicky said something, I gave her external body language, internal feelings, and reflective thoughts. So this is a big emotion, right? So now I have a big wave to ride. But no, you only did one exchange.
Right.
So you
Right.
haven't, you had a really powerful single exchange, but you didn't deepen the emotion because you kept it to one exchange.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah, that
if
makes
you had given me more exchanges, I could have given you a deeper emotion. Does that make sense?
yes, absolutely. No, I can totally, and I know we've talked about this before, and this is what I was, as I'm going through, I'm thinking about all the things in the revision class and all the things we've talked about, like when do you put it in and where do you put it in and how much do you put in? And I think it helps to have a little bit more, look at it for another time, but also have a little bit more behind it, like, because that's where I'm stuck.
Yeah.
When and how much
Yeah.
and then finding the right words. Not that I don't want the mundane, because I feel like I'm trying to pull out of myself another level of the the types of things that I want to be able to, the types of body language and also vocalizations that I want to say, to make it even more, um I'm not explaining myself very well, just
You
at a
are.
different
I'm with
level.
you.
Yeah, I feel like my writing is just naturally going there,
Yeah.
and I'm feeling like I'm really happy with that. I'm happy when I read something that I've written. I'm like, okay, but I know it's not enough. I know there's still so much more I could put into it. Um, and it's interesting when I read, and there are some books where there's a lot of description, and you are totally right. I find myself just glossing over it and
Yeah.
getting to
You
the
skim it.
dialogue. Very interesting. Like, I
Yeah.
totally noticed that now, even with some of my favorite authors.
And I'm curious, like, between you and me, I'm curious if it's always been that way or if that's new to our video-based culture. I can't decide because I read a lot of old books and it's hard because I can't get out of my own perspective because I read the old books and I'm like, well, yeah, this is how I feel about this. But then I'm like, well, if, I'm not a good judge of this because I'm the one, like, I'm trapped in this video culture. So I need a time machine to go back in time and grab somebody during, Jane Austen's time and be like, hey, does dialogue impact you the same way it impacts us as readers? I just don't know. So
So it's interesting because I mean, I've been reading for a lot longer than there's been video games, and so I I I read way back in the day all sorts of different books and was emotionally charged by with description. And I go back and I read some really, like, if it's a really good description and it really fits in, I think it's really important to have. But when it's too much, like, then there's like even V.E. Schwab and Tana French both, too much description sometimes. Too many things
yeah,
that I think I don't really need to know this. I want to know what's actually going on. I don't need to know what the street looked like and sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So I don't know. I don't watch a lot of TV. I mean, I obviously live in this era now, but
yeah.
I don't watch a lot of TV. I more read and listen to books. And so I'm not pulled into only the visuals either, but I don't know. I like both. I think there's validity in both.
Yeah, I do too. The question is like when I'm coaching writers like you,
Yeah.
it's like, what's working here, what's not working? Like, what is it that works and what doesn't work? Does that make sense?
I just gotta say, for me, I know that the vocalizations, when I can get a long conversation going, it feels like I've really hit the spot.
Yeah,
But the description doesn't do that. And I write like these two scenes, like I said, that one scene with Victoria and Michael felt like it didn't need it. Like it
Yeah,
was just such a moment in time, a very personal, emotional moment in time that to break it up with, and the couch was soft. What just was like, what?
yeah,
Why is that important? Whereas, the description of Tiffany coming in, about ready to fall over, that was more important because it showed where she was at emotionally at the time when she walked in the door. Like she was hanging on the door and her legs were giving out underneath her. That to me seemed important. Um, but I,
yeah.
you
And
know,
so the couch was soft is a good example of this. You're talking about expanding your body language, and the internal feelings and external expressions. So, kind of two things you need to know: the external movement, external expressions of body language. These are personality based. So external expressions of movement need to come out of the character's personality because they're a way we engage with other people. So if the character's
right,
shy, the movement's going to look one way. If the character's verbose, the movement's going to look another, right? Like it mirrors how the character presents themselves to the world. The internal feelings do not. Internal feelings are universal. So when you're talking about expanding how like your descriptions so that you can put more weight on an utterance, right? Which is what these are. I didn't label these, but these are, the way we put weight on an utterance. I'm going to send this to you, by the way, so you'll have it to look at.
good.
Um, so when we're talking about like the way we put weight on an utterance, uh, you have these tools, these four tools. The internal feelings is one we neglect a lot, and it's sad because while these are personality driven, these are universal. So we don't all feel anxiety in the same way, but we all understand the feelings of anxiety. We don't all get headaches when we're hungry, but we understand that somebody might get a headache when they're hungry. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
because the human body is a machine and they all operate in similar fashion, right? Like, so when you're talking about internal feelings, you're describing the response of your character's machine.
Okay.
So
The
things,
emotional response, not the physical response.
the body responding to the emotion,
Okay.
because we're emotional beings and our mechanisms have responses to emotion. When you feel afraid, your heart races.
Right.
When you feel afraid, um, you start to get antsy and twitchy on the inside,
Right.
right? Like
Right. And so I've been trying to use so those are the internal
these are
feelings.
the internal feelings that
Okay.
can build weight to an utterance.
Okay.
They don't deepen emotion by themselves. They strengthen an utterance. And it's a weird thing to say because there's kind of this scale going, right? Like if we had a scale here of like, you know, um, how do we deepen emotion? On one side of the scale, you have, more exchanges, and that's definitely like the stronger way to build emotion. Like that kind of weighs the scale down this way. Actually, I should draw this scale differently. Um, I should draw the scale like this. It kind of weighs it like this, like more exchanges has way greater weight. But another way you can deepen emotion is like complexity of utterances.
Okay.
So in the complexity of utterances, I mean you have these four tools. If you want an utterance to feel bigger, use all four tools,
Right.
right? But that doesn't necessarily, the best way to deepen emotion is more exchanges. If you want a super deep emotion, more exchanges with complex utterances. Does that make sense? Like, so
No,
you
no,
have these kind of
absolutely.
two tools to
Yeah,
like put weight on things.
yeah,
This is a heavier tool. Like this is the stronger tool,
right.
but this also will put weight on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are times when I feel like as I'm now writing just straight through, which I think I'm going to continue to do. I really like this. I write myself notes,
Yeah. That's
body
smart.
movement, feet touching the ground, and then I go back and I when I read it again, then I maybe put that in there. But I have like at those moments in time where I feel like something needs to be there, I just write myself a little note
Yeah.
and put it in blue so that I know as I go through that scene, here I thought something needed to be, but I'm still writing. Really, the dialogue is coming first.
That's great. And
Yeah.
so when we're talking about develop, and I really encourage that. Like, I'm a big dialogue
Yeah,
first
no,
person.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's coming naturally that way. So,
And so when you're looking to add these external and internal movements, when you add external movements, the recommendation I say is what's their personality? How do they feel? Now, how are they moving through the room?
okay.
Right? Like, so ask those two questions for an external movement: personality, feeling, how are they moving through a room? For an internal feeling, you want to ask, what's the emotion? That's always the first question when you're adding
Yeah.
external movement or internal feeling. What's the emotion? And then how do I feel that emotion? Or how do others feel that emotion? And that's a good way to start adding in these. But you don't just want to add body language or add internal feeling to add it because you'll start to cloud the emotion of the moment.
Which
These
is
are
what I was
tools to
doing the
convey
last time.
emotion.
Yeah, that's what I was doing the last time was using too much of it all over the place.
Yeah. Well, so going back to your example of a soft couch, what is she is internally feeling touching the couch and recognizing it as soft. Now, in real life, her body is experiencing 100 different things at one time. She's experiencing the couch is soft. She's experiencing the air is cold. She's experiencing, the smell of the room. She's experiencing, right? Like, and our brain just takes all of that input and translates it into an emotion for us, translates it into our interpretation of the moment. So you, as the author, are picking out one of those thousand things she's experiencing and saying, hey, reader, focus on this one because this one conveys the emotion I want you to understand. So the
Okay.
couch being soft, the touch of the couch being soft, she's the only one that knows that. That's why it's internal. Nobody else knows that the couch is soft.
Right.
That conveys to me like comfort and conveys to me like something soothing, something calming. Is that the emotion you're going for in this section of the writing? If that's the emotion you're going for, fantastic. If that's not the emotion you're going for, ignore the stupid couch. If you're going for her being uncomfortable, the air was sharp, right?
Okay.
She breathed in and the air in her lungs was sharp. That adds to the emotion of the moment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
So I like what you're doing. I like the like I'm writing the scene in dialogue and then I'm finding my like natural breaks of the dialogue, the segment breaks of the dialogue where I'm like, okay, here's where I can break the segments. And then I'm coming back and I'm adding in weight to the utterances through adding external, internal, and reflective thoughts, inner thoughts. And as I'm adding them in, I'm thinking what you need to be thinking is what's the emotion I'm trying to convey here, right? So does all of that make sense? Because that's
Yeah.
if
No,
so, we'll
absolutely.
stop the theory. We'll go to the
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. That's great.
okay. Let's talk about your actual piece and what it's like. I'll show you how I deepen the emotions of the scene, of the first scene, and then we can look at why the emotions of the second scene didn't necessarily pop like you want them to.
Okay.
So this is a big moment here.
Can you make that a little bit bigger?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My eye at 61, your eyes start to go.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay. Here's a good moment here. Sitting back in the love seat across from me, so I can tell this is where you think the start of a segment of dialogue is, because you've added this like
Yeah.
moment of exposition,
Right.
riding the wave. This is the wave you're riding. You've got a little moment of exposition living in that emotion. Sitting back in the left seat across from me, his feet crossed in front of him, resting his coffee on the table. He looks like Friday nights feels, totally relaxed and blank. His dreamy eyes catch my gaze, taking my breath away. At the same time, a feeling of dread overcomes me. So you're riding the wave of the previous emotion, and then you're hinting to the reader, hey, something's happening. This is a logical, not an emotive statement. At the same time, a feeling of dread overcomes me. I don't feel that dread here because it's in exposition. I think, oh, she's feeling dread. To make
Right.
me feel it, you got to get me present in the scene,
Right.
which you do. Now, you originally wrote, I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared to be alone. I don't know if I can do this without you. You don't have to. I'll be with you every step of the way. I'll always be by your side, even if it's on your mind. I take a deep breath and look up at him. He looks sad. Will you? It's the first time I confront my reality with him. I'm scared that you won't be in my mind forever, that I will forget you, your voice, what you look like. Now, that's a nice, you've done a good job building the weight of these utterances. Great vocalization conveys a lot of emotion. Repetition, nice, like the way that we talk when we're emotional. Great vocalization here, right? Like again, good repetition. Great observation, internal observation, or external. I take a deep breath and look up at him. Internal, he looks sad. I'm understanding that he looks sad. Internal thought, it's the first time I confront my reality with him. Vocalization. So you've created here in this piece, this that I broke up, which I'll talk about why I broke it up in a minute. You've created a really powerful utterance that conveys a lot of emotion. When you read it to your readers group, I bet my guess is this utterance caught their attention
Yeah,
because
they
they're,
were,
oh,
yeah.
yeah, because it carries a lot of emotional weight. Now, probably still, my bet is not satisfying you in the amount of emotion that it's carrying. You want it bigger, you want it more. So, and I can just tell by the way you're writing your vocalizations that like this is a place where you really want to crush the emotion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase, remember, the number of exchanges
Right.
deepens the emotion. So I'm going to add some exchanges that add zero content. They tell me nothing new. They just sit in the emotion. You don't have to, I'll be with you every step of the way. I'll always be your side, even if it's on your mind. I take a deep breath and look up at him. He looks sad. Will you? Of course I will. The sadness in his eyes is unyielding. I'm just repeating what you said here, right? But will you? I know you're telling me you will because it's what I want to hear, but will you? Of course I will. It's the first time I confront my reality with him. Can you see how adding those exchanges brings out a depth of emotion?
Right. It's not adding to it, it's just saying it, basically repeating.
You're
Or
taking
or her
this,
really questioning a little bit more.
yeah, you're taking the movie of their imagination
Hmm.
and you're going, this scene is twice as long as any other scene.
Okay.
The camera stays on this emotion, right? And that's how you're like that's how we deepen emotion. So you've got the two tools going. You've got this great complex utterance. But we're also going to stretch it out
Okay.
and not adding content, but just circling the emotion to keep the
Sometimes I
screen on there longer.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like when I if I'm doing that, I'm doing too much, and my reader's gonna be like, all right, enough already.
If you do it too much, they're going to do that. They're going to be like, all
Yeah.
right, so you've got to find the places. And I leave a note for you in here that you can read later, but you've got to find the places where you're like, this is an emotional climax.
Okay.
And you have to be strategic in how you use these tools because you're right. If every scene, if the camera stays on every emotion you have, the reader's like, oh my gosh, we're feeling so much. Can we just move on with the story? Right? Like, so there's always a balance. And part of that balance is your author voice.
Right.
All right. Like you're saying you like authors that have heavier emotion, right? Like, so part of that balance is that like author weight.
Yeah.
So there, and that's where it comes to like, hey, there's no right way to do this. These are just tools for you to use. So
Right.
if you're like, I don't want to do this like deepening of emotion with multiple exchanges, then you're really going to have to lean into having complex utterances.
Right.
If you're like, I don't want complex utterances, I want that like quick, fast, just vocalizations, two characters passing the ball back and forth, then you have to like really lean into having more exchanges on a single moment.
Well, and I think there's place for both. Like right now, at the very end, that I'm really struggling with, the quick back and forth wouldn't work. It
Yeah.
has because it's such a deep for Victoria to say, "All right, you can come with me, Tiffany, to Costa Rica. I understand that I might need somebody." Is something that she has to like literally work through in her
Yeah.
brain. With Tiffany saying it over and over and over again in different ways, or at least saying it like literally throwing it in her face so I have thicker paragraphs there because there
Yeah.
is a lot of inner thought like, oh my God, I don't like, yes, maybe, maybe not. So it's interesting that I can see the two different ways that I'm doing it, but still need to pull, like, I probably need to expand it out a little bit more
Yeah.
and do more utterances as in between, like taking those paragraphs where there's inner thought and putting utterances in there is
And
what
down
probably
there, you
be,
have a different problem, which we'll get to in a second. But there's one more thing I want to show you because you had asked about like where do I put things, where do I put inner thoughts and stuff like that.
yeah,
Here's a good example of where you can drop inner thoughts in. So I can't take more than a few steps. Promise, I promise. Right? Like, so she's got this moment of questioning. He's still being resolute, I promise. And then here she says, okay, I trust you. So there's an emotional turn here
okay,
from doubt to her making an uncertainty to her
okay,
making a decision to let go of that uncertainty. That's the end of a segment. You're on the same conversation, but you're making an emotional shift.
okay,
Because you're making that emotional shift, you have the a moment here where you can drop in exposition and ride the wave you've created. So you created this powerful wave of emotion by using deep utterances and um, forcing the screen of the character's imagination onto the this moment longer than usual. Now you have a place where you can ride that wave before you change the emotion to something else. Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah.
So in those emotional shifts, you're like, okay, I've created a big wave. If I want to, I can pay this off.
I like the idea of an emotional wave and then finishing it off with, when you make that the end of it, that helps to think about it as not different paragraphs of conversation, but one whole emotional
Yeah, you can
piece,
surf it.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. That helps.
Yeah.
That's
Now, here's an example of where you're not having emotion, which isn't, again, isn't bad because you're moving the content too quickly. So you have one, two, three, four, five exchanges here, five back and forths. In that time, you cover today is hard. Michael has moved in the room. Where is she going to move to? And what's the first step? So in five exchanges, you cover four pieces of content. This is going to feel unemotional
okay.
because you're not spending, the camera isn't, of the reader's imagination, isn't spending any time on
Okay.
any of these feelings. Can you see the difference between how this feels
Mhm.
deep and then this feels like it's not unemotional? It's got some emotion to it, but it's not deep emotion.
Right.
Right. And that's, I actually think this is right. I wouldn't change it. I just noted it to show you the two different types of
Yeah.
sitting in an emotion versus having emotions that are there, but we're not sitting in them.
Okay. Because if I sat in every one of those emotions, it would be,
Oh, just drive the reader nuts.
yeah, it would drive the reader
Yeah.
nuts.
You're
Yeah.
gonna go crazy. Yeah. Here's another place where I'm extending your exchanges to bring out deeper emotions. You had, I miss you, Michael, every day, every moment of the day. I can feel it. You had a very complex vocalization there. And then Michael says, but you're strong. You will find a way forward, your future. I know you will. She says, it doesn't feel like it right now. It's been almost a year. So here we have our first change. Like this is our second emotion. He says, I should be okay, but I'm not. It's only been a year, darling, only a year. It feels like yesterday. He looks up. So this is a complex utterance from him. Ignore my green. It's only been a year, darling, only a year. It feels like yesterday. He looks up at me, his hand on his heart. I will be here with you for a long time, I promise. So again, you've got a nice thing going here where we're coming to the end of the emotion. You're giving me a big utterance as like an emotional cadence. Does that make sense? Like you did up before. So I'm going to spend more screen time here. Instead of I miss you, Michael, every day, every moment of the day, I miss you, Michael. I know. Every day, every moment of the day, I can feel it. I miss you so much. But you're strong. You'll find a way forward. Your future, I know you will. It doesn't feel like it right now. It's been almost a year. It'll take time. It should be okay, but I'm not. Can you see how I'm just extending
Hmm.
the exchanges to keep the camera on that emotion, the
Okay.
camera of their imagination? Does that make sense?
It does, it feels, my gut reaction is that it, and I might be wrong about this, my gut reaction is that if he's just repeating or and he's doing the simple words, which he does, he's not repeating with long sentences,
Yes.
it almost feels like it dissipates if it's if I put too much of that in. Maybe a little bit more, but I want to be careful that I don't bring it out too much. It doesn't.
You can definitely overdo it. You only want to use it
Yeah.
when you have peak emotions. If you're
Okay.
doing it all the time, you're right.
Yeah.
It's feelings are one of those things of they act like hormones act like drugs. The more you feel it, the less you feel it, right? Like we were talking about coffee earlier. The more caffeine you drink, the less impact caffeine has on you. It's the same with this. The more you
Yeah.
play this game of like, I'm going to deepen this moment of the emotion, the less effective this tool is. So
Okay.
you got to take your peak moments and do this in your peak moments.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this section where I left you other notes here you can read on your own, but let's talk about why this section you're trying to build this big emotion and it's not necessarily working.
Yeah.
So you've got this big utterance here from a side character, right? Should have a lot of emotion. Not necessarily building. You give me a big description here of how she looks, how she's feeling, trying to like use all of your tools to pull it out. You sit in you actually do a good job of sitting in the emotion here with more exchanges.
Yeah.
Still not feeling it. Right. Like, and I bet when you read it, you were like, why am I not feeling this? Because you
Yeah.
keep going. You keep giving me these huge utterances, trying to get me to feel this woman's emotion. Here's why I'm not feeling it. I'm in your vehicle character, and your vehicle isn't feeling it. I get us here's let's just read your vehicle. First, let's get you settled on the couch, then you can tell me what happened. Big emotion from her. Here you go. A sip of wine will help take the edge off. Big body language from her. And then vocalization from her. I'm glad you called, I said, moving closer, folding my legs under me. I reach out, but I don't touch her. Not sure if she wants me that close. What's the emotion your vehicle's feeling? Did something happen with Dave? Big utterance from her, using all your tools in the utterance. I get a sinking feeling I know what happened, but I don't want to say it out loud. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Big utterance from her. Big, right? Big
Interesting.
utterance from her. I can feel her staring at me, but I remain silent, not wanting to interrupt her. This is how your reader's feeling because your reader is feeling your vehicle's emotion, not your side character's emotion.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah. So your reader's like, I'm objectively watching this woman fall apart. I really want to help her.
Yeah. Okay.
Your reader's not feeling the pain of Dave dumped me because we're not in her head. We're in
Yeah.
your vehicle's head.
So here's the problem with that is that Victoria doesn't like my whole through this entire first act, Victoria has changed a little bit, but she doesn't get emotionally involved with Tiffany's stuff, really.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to. I mean, Tiffany came to her. She's not asking for this. She has been sort of um, pushing back on anybody trying to help her because she doesn't. I think she's so emotional. She can't take it. And she says it. I can't take on her problems. because I have so many of my own. So I can't have her reacting in a way like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Whatever. That I'm trying not to do that because she can't do that. And she says that to Victoria over and over and over again. I cannot help you. I have my own problems. So
Yeah.
how do I then fix that? Because her reaction is the way I imagine her being like, all right, I'll take care of you, but I can't get emotionally involved. And in the next scene, she falls apart because she starts talking about Michael and she can't do that. She can't over emote with someone else, only with herself and Michael because she still hasn't gotten over the grief.
And that's
And
great.
so
I don't know what are you trying to fix there?
I'm just, no, I'm not trying, I'm just saying that that is the reason why she's not reacting in more of an emotional way.
Yeah.
So I can see, I totally see what you're saying. But I did it on purpose, but I
Yep.
can totally see why.
Then
Um,
I don't think there's anything here to fix. I think you got what you wanted. Like,
oh,
so
okay.
there's a, like, when we pick our vehicle character, we design their character growth arc, which is what you're talking about. You're talking about like how she needs to grow and change. She can only emote with Michael. She needs to like emote like the
Yeah,
ghost of her husband. She needs to emote with other people. This is a growth point for her.
right.
You're describing it beautifully here. This woman's falling apart and she's like, I'm not feeling this. Now, if you really want to drive it home, give her a moment of reflection of being like, why am I not feeling this?
Okay.
I should be sad, but I'm not. It's weird. Like,
Yeah.
let her reflect on it. That's the beauty of first person, is that in first person, she can reflect on the fact that she needs to grow,
Right,
right?
right,
If you're in third person or if you're an omniscient, the narrator can reflect on the fact that she needs to grow. She can be like, man, Victoria has problems that she's not feeling this, right? Like that's the narrator. But in
right.
first person, the beauty is you can have an emotive reflection on like, man, I should, I'm weirdly unmoved. This isn't right. Right? Like that's a way that you can note for the reader, like, hey, pay attention. This is wrong. We shouldn't feel this way. Or you can
Okay.
have another character say it. You can have another character get mad at her and be like, I'm pouring my heart out here, and you're just sitting there like a statue.
Right.
Right? Like that's another way to tell the reader, like, hey, this is broken. But we design our vehicle character, we pick our perspective, and the perspectives have different strengths and weaknesses. Once we pick our perspective and we've designed our character, um, those are our limitations.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's what
you've
yeah.
picked a character, you've designed a character in first person POV, which is very vehicle centric, that isn't going to feel other things when people describe it to her. So you have exactly what you've designed. She's not going to feel other things.
Not
So
yet. Not
yeah,
yet.
so now the question is like, start playing with it. Have Tiffany get mad here and be like, how are you so stoic? Right? Like, and then have her go like,
Okay.
how am I so stoic? I just can't, I just can't do this. And then have her say like, I'm here for you, right? Like she doesn't need to acknowledge it to Tiffany. She needs to be like, hey, we can't both fall apart at the same time. I'm here for you, which is a total lie. But she can like say that. Does that make sense? Like,
Right.
you don't have to have this big fight between them, but just take an exchange and have Tiffany note like, this feels weird. You feel weird. And then the reader will be like, oh, there is something weird happening here. This isn't how it
I mean,
should.
even though at this moment in time, I imagine Tiffany can think of nothing but like she's sort of out of her mind at this point. The next day, totally does a 180 and's like, hell with Dave. I'm moving on.
Yeah, but
That's
in
the
here,
thing.
like somewhere in here, like instead of having her be like, before you get like to this, do you want me to check on you in a few minutes?
Yeah,
Right? Because she's kind of ramping down.
yeah.
I might put in here somewhere of the like, I'm pouring my heart out here. You seem really calm in her like height of
Okay.
mania. And then have Victoria be like, have the inner thought. It does, I do feel detached from this. And
Or
that
I just
can't be
can't
good.
again, I can't involve my emotions in what you're
Yeah.
dealing with because I lose it on my end.
Yeah. And
I
then have Victoria say, but then have Victoria make an excuse that brings the conversation back to where we are. And that, like, no, no, I'm holding it together for you.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
if you give her the inner thought that's the truth and then the external vocalization that's the lie, it contrasts for the reader, like, oh, something's broken here. Does that make
Right.
sense? Like,
Right. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah. No, that's
Okay.
good. And so in this one, the I so I was struggling with like not having enough inner thought, not having enough physicality, but it sounds like
I think your
I
dialogue here is
do.
beautiful. I have
Okay,
no notes on your dialogue. I think it's
okay,
great.
all right,
I
good.
I was making my notes, and you can read them later. I won't read them all to
Yeah,
you. My notes are about like I can feel you really wanting the reader to have this deep emotion with Tiffany. It's never gonna work as long as Victoria is static. Like
yeah, yeah.
those are my notes for you. So if you want, when you come back to this and edit,
Hmm.
if you want a section to cut down, if you're looking to remove words, this is the section you cut down. Because
Okay,
there's a lot of cyclical stuff here, right?
yeah,
Like we watch her breathing at the car for like a half a page. And I can tell it's because you're trying to get me to feel it. You want to
that's
raise
right.
the drum. But as
Yeah.
long as Victoria is detached, I'm not going to feel it.
Okay,
So you're
okay,
just describing for me something over and over again that is like, all right, well, she's upset. She's upset. Just get her in the house, right? Like, so
right.
there's a
Okay,
like, but this is part of like understanding your tools as well and understanding the parameters you set with yourself around your vehicle character. If you want me to feel something, your vehicle character has to feel it. Like
okay,
going back to our little chart. Um, your sorry, here it comes. Your vehicle character has to feel it, right? Perspective is first. And then your descriptions can ride the wave of an emotion, but to really build an emotion, exchanges and dialogue, more
okay,
exchanges equals deeper emotion.
okay.
More exchanges without new content equals deeper emotion,
Right,
right?
right. I can see
You
how
have,
adding more content in there, like the difference between the
yep,
fast Michael moving is I needed to move it forward and say a couple of things and then move on to that's that there's a difference that I can visually see that. That's
yeah,
that okay, so I wasn't thinking that, but that's what I did.
yeah. And so more exchanges in the same content equals deeper emotion. When
Yeah,
it comes to your utterances, you have four tools to put weight on them,
yeah,
right? We talked about the difference between these two. If you want to build heavy emotion, more exchanges is more powerful than complex utterances. They
yeah.
both weigh the scale, but more exchanges has a bigger impact.
That makes sense. Okay.
So, but
Right,
like you said, don't do this every scene
right.
because you'll drive your reader insane. They'll be
Yeah,
like, what is, I don't, because it is like that, it's like taking um, a medication over time, the impact of that medication becomes less and less effective
yeah.
because your body adjusts to it. In the same way, the more you do this, the more your reader's like, all right, we're feeling a big emotion again. I don't like, we're doing this again. Like,
Yeah,
so
right.
it's not like use it at peak moments to really accentuate something. I would probably do it in important conversations with Michael. Not all conversations. Like you saw how in the conversation you had with Michael, I really just did it once.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
that
the
makes sense.
the rest of the conversation was like just a back and forth. But
Yeah,
yeah,
sometimes she has a really quick conversation. Like in the next scene, she has like 3 or 4 lines back and forth where she's like hiding in his office because she like had this emotional wave of grief. So
yeah,
she's and he's like, "You can do this again. You can do this," and he sends her back. So it's a very quick one, but it's just showing that she's constantly having this back and forth with him.
yeah,
She uses him as her support. So I'm going to go through the last scene that I'm doing right now and think about this because I think it will help me. I'm really stuck in the muck in it, trying to make her make this decision, and I feel like I need to loosen up the conversation and make it faster. I
yeah.
think it will help. I feel like it's all mucky and there's too many words in there.
Well,
Maybe,
and so the other we talked about adding emotion. The other is true for taking emotion away. Less exchanges on a single. If you want it to feel fast and light and moving,
yeah,
less exchange. Like move topics quickly, get those
yeah,
topics going. Less exchanges on something, right?
right,
Like, the truth is like you still and you want less complex utterances, right? Like simple utterances,
yeah,
quick back and forths, like, use your exchanges to change topics pretty quickly. And then like don't ride waves of emotion. Just let the emotions pass and go on to the next one, right? Like so if you want it to feel light and airy, you know,
that way, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, thank you. I'm glad I chose these two because it really, um,
these were perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's because I literally I was so stuck. I'm like, oh, especially on this last scene, but I'm going to work
No.
on the last scene. Now, I feel like I right now want to keep on moving forward.